There is a precise moment when the noise of the world fades, leaving only the heavy, echoing architecture of one's own mind. We often measure human lives by milestones: what is built, what is achieved, what is left behind. Yet, the most profound human transformations happen in the quiet, unlit spaces of the psyche, where a person must dismantle their entire identity just to find out who they are beneath the rubble. This is the story of a man who spent decades constructing a fortress of safety, only to discover that his sanctuary had become a prison. Through an intimate lens of psychological exploration and emotional resilience, we examine the anatomy of a breakdown and the slow, agonizing artistry of becoming whole again. For 40 years, Julian stood as the quintessential pillar of reliability. In the quiet corridors of his own history, reliability was not merely a virtue, it was a survival mechanism. Growing up in an environment where emotional volatility dictated the daily weather, Julian learned early to suppress his own needs, becoming the mediator, the calm center, and the unwavering provider. Psychologists often refer to this as the hyper-independent facade, a coping mechanism where an individual equates vulnerability with existential danger. Julian's daily routine was a masterclass in emotional containment. Every morning began at 5 a.m., marked by an unyielding checklist of duties. He managed a demanding career in structural engineering, a field that offered him a comforting illusion. The belief that everything in life could be calculated, stabilized, and held together by sheer force of mathematical precision. If a bridge could withstand a gale-force wind, surely a human life could endure perpetual stress without cracking. Yet, human beings are not made of reinforced steel. Beneath Julian's calm, unassuming exterior, a silent erosion was taking place. The emotional triggers that once went unnoticed began to multiply. A sudden loud noise, an unexpected change in schedule, or a moment of unstructured silence would induce a tight, suffocating constriction in his chest. He attributed these physical symptoms to exhaustion, doubling down on his work ethic as a remedy. He believed that if he just tried harder, achieved more, and maintained absolute control, the creeping sense of emptiness would vanish. The psychological cost of this endurance was immense. Julian had traded his authentic self for a role, performing a script written by expectations he had never agreed to. He was drowning in plain sight, trapped by the very competence that earned him the admiration of his peers. As the autumn air grew colder, a minor professional miscalculation, a delayed shipment at a construction site, served as the unexpected catalyst. It was a routine hurdle, nothing more. But for Julian, it felt like the foundational pillars of his entire existence were suddenly giving way. He sat in his parked car outside the office, staring at the steering wheel, realizing with a cold, terrifying clarity that he could no longer feel anything at all. What happens when the architect of safety realizes he has engineered his own trap? The weeks following the incident in the parking lot were marked by a profound, eerie stillness. Julian did not experience a dramatic, cinematic breakdown. Instead, his system simply shut down. In psychological terms, he was experiencing acute emotional dissociation, a protective numbing mechanism that occurs when the brain decides the current reality is too overwhelming to process consciously. To the outside world, Julian appeared functional, though unusually quiet. Inside, however, the fortress he had spent a lifetime building was experiencing a catastrophic structural failure. The emotional stakes had never been higher, yet he felt entirely detached from the outcome. He began to miss deadlines, stare blankly during board meetings, and withdraw from the superficial interactions that once constituted his social life. The control he prized above all else was slipping through his fingers like dry sand. This phase of the journey forced Julian into an agonizing confrontation with his inner landscape. For the first time, he had to examine the emotional triggers he had spent decades burying. He realized that his relentless drive was not born of ambition, but of a deep-seated terror of being abandoned. He had believed that if he stopped performing, stopped fixing, and stopped carrying everyone else's burdens, he would cease to matter. The mental toll manifested physically. Insomnia settled in like a permanent resident, and the phantom weight on his chest became a constant companion. Yet, within this breakdown lay the seeds of an uncomfortable truth. The final chapter of human transformation rarely features flashing lights or triumphant fanfare. Instead, it arrives quietly, like dawn breaking over a quiet landscape. Julian did not return to his old life. He curated an entirely new one, built not on the rigid steel of perfectionism, but on the flexible, forgiving architecture of grace. He returned to engineering, but with transformed boundaries. He learned to delegate, to step back, and to accept that imperfection is not a failure of character, but an inherent part of the human design. The professional setbacks that once triggered existential panic were now viewed with perspective. Problems to be solved, not reflections of his worth. Psychologically, Julian had integrated his shadow. He no longer viewed his vulnerability as a weakness to be suppressed, but as the very gateway to authentic human connection. He began dating again, this time approaching relationships not as a caretaker or a fixer, but as an equal willing to be seen in all his complexity. The journey taught him a profound lesson. We spend so much of our lives trying to protect ourselves from pain, only to realize that the armor we wear ends up cutting us off from the very joy we seek. True resilience is not about refusing to break. It is about learning how to put the pieces back together with greater wisdom and compassion. As the sun sets over the quiet apartment he now calls home, Julian sits with his sketchbook, tracing gentle, organic lines rather than rigid geometric grids. He is no longer an architect of safe fortresses, but a custodian of his own authentic truth. His story invites us to pause and reflect on our own lives. What are the heavy expectations we are carrying that were never ours to bear? What would happen if we finally set them down, embraced the silence, and allowed ourselves the grace to simply begin again?